Good morning and good day to our international audience. Welcome to our webinar, Communication, Innovation and Leadership. This is a collaboration between the Open University Business School and the Whole Thing Group. This webinar is part of a four webinar series we've called Innovation and Leadership. It considers the effect of the coronavirus pandemic on four critical business themes, being business, communication, finance, and social. Our aim today is to explore the experiences and lessons learned by experts, the leaders and directors of communication throughout this pandemic. So I'm very interested to introduce you to our expert panel shortly. My name is Simon Wallace of the Whole Thing Group. I'm co-host along with Dr. Jedrzej Frynas. Now, George is Professor of Strategic Management at the Open University Business School. I'm delighted also to introduce you to a very special panel today. Lianne Braganza de Silva, she's Chief Marketing Officer of Cigna Insurance Middle East. We're joined also by Kate Payne, who's Associate Director of Digital Strategy and Capability at Astellas Europe, and Sara Roberts, CEO and founder of Healthy Nibbles. So I'm very much looking forward to introducing you to each in a moment. Today is a live event. There's an opportunity for you in the audience to ask questions. Thank you very much for watching. On the right hand of your screen, you'll see a question portal. So please, as you're watching, put in your questions. George will gather those questions and he will join us later. So the session today will take about an hour. I'm hoping you're sitting comfortably, and we'll bring in our first expert. Lianne, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Lianne. And I must say, good morning. It's probably good afternoon. So you're calling us in from Dubai in the UAE. Are you okay?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, Lianne, I would just like to introduce the audience to you and to give them a little bit of a flavour of who you are and Cigna Insurance Middle East. So is that okay?
Sure.
Great, thank you. So Lianne, pleasure that you're joining us today. You are Chief Marketing Officer at Cigna Insurance Middle East. You've got over 20 years of marketing and communication experience. You've got a very strong and rich history in health, wellness and insurance, but you have got previous roles in retail and hospitality sectors. And I'm told that you're the go-to person when the answer must be yes. So it's a pleasure to have you on the panel. Cigna Insurance Middle East is a giant. It's established way back in 1792. It provides global health insurance to over 86 million customers in over 200 countries. The business globally has got 37,000 employees, plus a medical network comprising of over 1.65 million people. So, Lianne, it's a pleasure to have you here representing yourself and, of course, Cigna Middle East. If I could just ask you a few questions, Lianne. Please, to start off with, can you give us a little context of your situation and tell us what has been the biggest challenge in terms of communication for you during this pandemic? Thank you, Lianne.
Sure. So I'd like to break down the challenges into two stakeholder groups. When we were going through this, we dealt firstly with the challenge of working with our employees, and the second challenge, of course, was with our customers. For our employees, it was important for us to stabilize the situation whilst also helping them build a capacity to thrive. This put an enormous pressure on the leadership to respond to anxieties, but respond to that with a level of authoritative certainty. Employees wanted to feel secure that what we were saying to them, was the absolute truth and was, authoritative information, even if at times the information was evolving on an hourly basis. And for customers, it was truly an unprecedented situation. There was misinformation, there was panic, and we were dealing with a rapidly changing infodemic.
Right, very interesting. And what then, given that challenge, what were your key messages inside and outside the business, Leah?
So I would say for employees, it was important to present ourselves to them as us being available, letting them know that we understand what they were going through, and then providing a sense of assurance by saying, you know, we're going to get through this and we're going to get through it together. For customers, it was about being available constantly. It was about making sure that we helped them navigate the sea of misinformation. It was about passing through that information and giving them information that was of value to them, and providing clarity when they needed it.
Really interesting. And what medium do you use for your communication, and how frequently, Lianne, do you communicate? Media inside and perhaps outside too. But thank you.
So we use a combination of both digital and remote channels. With customers, it was continuous contact with our clinical teams and our customer service teams and client management teams by phone, as well as by digital communication. We also try to help our customers and support them to adopt digital capabilities and telehealth. So this would allow them to access care from their homes, but also allow them to find support during times of duress. We also launched a series of webinars that they could dial into. It was on a regular basis. These were called Connect for Health, and this gave them access to guidance and information from experts. Some of the topics at these webinars included things like positive parenting, as they were dealing with educating kids and helping them through e-learning. How do you get to be at your peak performance, whether it was improving your sleep or managing your stress? How do you manage your diet when you're, cooking from home? What are the hidden toxins that exist in food if you're ordering constantly? And then as things evolved, how do we help customers transition out of lockdown? For employees, it was slightly different. We used a combination of collaborative systems, both formal and informal. The important thing for us was to keep them informed and ready with information. So we had a microsite that we were updating on a regular basis, but we also had a microsite that was specially for employees that allowed them to interact with each other, given that they were missing the physical space and the water cooler conversations. I mean, nothing could replace that, but the microsite allowed them to put birthday messages to each other. It allowed them to upload home videos of themselves and hanging out with kids. And then we also have colleague resource groups that existed, which we converted into digital form and had green table talks with some of our key leaders to give them a view on how the leadership was responding to the crisis and what tools and frameworks they were having to use to help them manage themselves better. Right.
Yeah, some really, really exciting initiatives. I'm sure your colleagues really got engaged with that. So I'm interested to understand how you're measuring the results of these communication methods, and what are these results telling you, Lianne?
So we did actually run a pulse employee engagement survey internally, and what we found out was as a result of the pandemic, when we would otherwise hold a physical town hall, it would probably once every 2 months. But because we wanted to be available for our employees, we were running weekly town halls, virtual town halls. And we found that actually our employees really appreciated that. Engagement with the company spiked up 20% during this time because they felt that we were continuously talking to them, and we provided a platform for them to ask questions. The entire leadership team was always available to them to answer their questions. We also conduct customer studies. We conducted a global impact study with our customers. and some of the results showed that there was a prevalent always-on culture that exists in the UAE, which actually increased during the lockdown period. And people have been worried about their health and their loved ones, along with the added financial stress and security. So these surveys give us an idea of how people are responding to some of the tools that we put out there, and then we use the survey to help us pivot or adapt our vehicles accordingly.
And how frequently did you actually put these surveys out? And how long after the pandemic did you wait before the first survey was?
So we conducted one during the survey, which was over the months of March and April, which was the Pulse survey, where it showed us that actually technology was enabling people to be more close to their friends and family in the UAE. And we are conducting another survey right now in the middle of the pandemic, and initial figures are showing us that there has been a reversal in certain themes that have come out from the previous survey. So I think it's a rapidly evolving situation, and we will conduct another survey later on in the year to see if sentiment has changed drastically, or if it's just an extension of what people have been feeling in the last 6 months.
Well, Lianne, thank you so much. That's a really good start to the webinar. If you don't mind, we'll come back to you later. I'm going to bring in Kate Payne. Thank you, Lianne.
Thank you, Simon.
Kate, good morning to you.
Morning, Simon.
How are you doing, Kate?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much.
You're good.
You're calling us in from down south in Reigate.
That's right, yeah.
So, Kate, I'm just...
Well, not sunny weather, indifferent.
Okay, fantastic, thank you. So I'd like to give the audience a flavour, Kate, of who you are, and also a flavour of Astellas Europe first. Thank you very much. So Kate Payne, you're Associate Director, Digital Strategy and Capabilities at Astellas Europe. You've got a very exciting career, over 24 years in senior communication and marketing roles, with the last 13 being in the pharmaceutical sector. And I was very interested to see you'd worked with people like Google and Pfizer. With an earlier career, also, Kate, as a journalist, and you've worked for people like Time and The Independent and BBC. And it's not on here, but I did notice that The Guardian had voted you BBC Journalist of the Year in 2000. So it's a real pleasure to have you here, Kate. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Astellas Europe, also a fascinating business. You're part of Astellas Pharma. It's a listed Japanese multinational formed in 2005. It's in the top 25 global biopharma companies based on prescription sales. And you focus on 3 key therapy areas of oncology, urology, and transplantation. And you've got more than 60,000 employees worldwide. So, Kate, it's a pleasure to have you on our panel this morning, representing Astellas Europe. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, lovely to be here.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to ask you the similar questions, Kate. If you could just start off with giving us a little context of your business. And tell us what has been your biggest communication challenge for you during this pandemic.
Yeah, sure. So within Astellas Pharma, I work in the established commercial markets region, which covers Europe, Canada and Australia. And my role is to support the digital marketing strategy and capability within those regions. Now, clearly, in terms of the context, in being a pharmaceutical company, what we provide to patients and customers are need to haves. They're not nice to haves. So understandably, in a situation such as this, our overriding message, which I'll come to in a little bit, was around care and reassurance, so that patients would get the medications that they needed when they needed them. In terms of the actual communication challenge, I think the main issue for Astellas is one that would have been felt by pharma companies worldwide, and that is the need for agility. And the reason that's particularly challenging for pharma is we are bound by a number of regulations and codes of practice that require rigorous review and approval process. So with situations such as COVID, which is rapidly evolving, we need to have a timely response. But the approval process alone takes time, let alone the actual compilation of the messaging itself. So that was one of our biggest challenges. How do we respond in a timely fashion in order to be effective? And that's externally. In terms of internal communications, there is an added challenge due to the sheer number of markets that we operate in. So we have more than 40 offices worldwide, and the situation was slightly different for each. And so an added factor was that we needed to tailor that communication to the relevant market.
Right, yes, there's some significant challenges, if nothing else, in the scale. What are your key messages then, Kate, inside and outside of your business?
Yes, I think this breaks down to two key messages, and that's one of both care and reassurance. And much like Lianne, what I'll probably do is try and demonstrate how Astellas has followed through on this by singling out specific areas of the business. So if we take the manufacturing and supply chain side of the business initially, the business, Astellas, continued to operate throughout the pandemic, ensuring that there was a safe supply of our medicines to those that needed them. Now, we were able to do this by assisting our colleagues to work tirelessly around the clock to ensure that continuity of supply. But we are able to do this because we stepped up health and safety measures really rapidly so that they were safe in doing so. If we then take a look internally at head office, decisions were made by Astellas for employees to work home, in many cases ahead of government's directions. And that was certainly the case in the UK, which is where I'm based. Mm-hmm. Additionally, there was real empathy and understanding that there would be colleagues who are managing childcare and or homeschooling. And so there was a switch in the focus on that looks at output and less the hours worked. And I know that that was hugely appreciated. You know, as a mother who is homeschooling, I think that was an incredibly good move and one that's been well received. In addition to some of the things, again, that Lianne said, we had the usual technical support, but we also had a series of wellness sessions or mindfulness sessions that really assisted colleagues to thrive and not just get by during this pandemic. And then finally, if we look at pharma as an industry, what we saw perhaps more than ever is pharma coming together and collaborating in order to find medications that would help address this virus. So we have responded to the request from FPA, which is the European Federation of Pharma Industries and Associates, and the IMI, which is the Innovative Medicines Initiative, to cooperate in activities aimed at developing drugs for COVID-19. Additionally, at a more local level, what we saw is some of our medical colleagues stepping back into hospitals and pharmacies to assist on a voluntary basis. We continued also to support patient groups, albeit through virtual means, and Astellas has been generous with emergency funding to humanitarian organisations working to fight C-19 also. Right,
thank you very much. So are there any other medium that you're using for your communication? And Kate, how frequently are you doing this? Are you communicating?
Yeah, so it's interesting, I think, from an internal perspective in terms of colleagues and externally to the public, there's nothing particularly different perhaps that we're doing, but certainly there's a greater frequency. So internally, we saw initially around 2 to 3 emails a week from our HR colleagues informing us of the situation, I think in part to reassure that they'd got this and there was a plan. And indeed, we do have a task force managing our C-19 response and our plan back to work when that happens, in terms of back to the office. So we had the usual email, Skype. We use a video conferencing platform called On24, which people may be familiar with. There's SharePoint, Intranet, and so on. But what we're seeing interestingly, we're seeing a slowing down of communications regarding COVID-19, and really only new emails when they're updating us about something new. So already it's starting to feel like a new normal, if you like. From an external perspective, in terms of communications with the public, we use websites and social channels. And I would say broadly that our response to that has been fairly steady. We often see a peak when we focus on personal stories, but again, that's not particularly unique to COVID-19. I would say where we've seen our greatest sea change has been in our communications with healthcare professionals. So the pharmaceutical industry is an established industry and typically quite traditional in the way it operates. And so there's been a heavy focus on face-to-face communications and a very gradual dissemination of digital channels within that to date. What we've seen with COVID-19 is our back has been against the wall, and when your back's against the wall, there's only one direction to move in, and we've seen rapid uptake of digital channels. Specifically for us, we use Viva Engage Meeting, which is a virtual meeting platform, and to give you a sense of how quickly we moved, in March, at the beginning of March, we were standing that channel up for 3 countries. By the end of March, we were standing it up for 40. So it was a rapid rollout. It wasn't overnight. As somebody who's been in the thick of it, I can assure you it wasn't overnight. It's taken a few weeks, but it's been incredibly successful. Based on early results, we have managed to reconnect with our HCPs and support them via that virtual platform.
Right, fascinating, and the speed of scale-ups is significant. Well, clearly, are you measuring these results, the results of your communication? And Kate, what are they telling you then, the results?
Yeah, we are. I think we measure all outgoing communications as a matter of course. I would say externally, having spoken to my colleagues who are on the front line with that, is the communications have been well received. No sudden spikes, but equally they're answering perhaps the questions before they're posed. What again, we're seeing less communications around COVID-19, so it's interesting. We have almost studied there. From a healthcare professional perspective, unsurprisingly, we've seen a huge drop in face-to-face calls and a big spike in virtual calls in a very short space of time. So if you think this has all happened so quickly, we're already tracking calls in their thousands across the Europe, Middle East and Africa. And interestingly, calls are considerably longer, which would suggest that the interactions are of a higher quality and possibly more discursive than they have been previously. Another interesting result is that we and pharma generally are starting to be able to reach what we call as no-see customers, so customers that have previously not been visited. And I think one of the key reasons for this is we are now, we have tools in place to collect the consent or the permission that is required to speak to our healthcare professionals via virtual means, where perhaps that wasn't in place before. So it's interesting that not only are we able to continue comms at a level that we would have wanted to pre C-19, but in some cases we're actually there's been improvements, and I think because of those improvements we will probably see a hybrid way of working when things when COVID-19 passes through in whatever, clearly we don't quite know what format that's going to look like, but I think business has changed and will continue to be changed.
Really interesting, Kate. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, we're going to leave you now and we'll come back to you shortly, but thank you again, Kate. We're going to bring in Sara. Sara, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
Very well, how are you?
Great. Welcome to our webinar, and thank you very much for investing time and energy to this. if I can just introduce our audience to you, Sara and Healthy Nibbles. Sara, you're CEO and founder of Healthy Nibbles. You've got over 20 years of board level experience. A very interesting history, previously 15 years of brand strategy development across multiple industry sectors in sub-Saharan Africa and the UK. I couldn't fit all your awards onto this slide. You're a multi-award winner, including one of your most recent ones. I think you're one of 60 EY's European Winning Women, which is a significant award. And it's a real pleasure to have you on our panel, Sara.
Thank you.
Yes, Healthy Nibbles is a really exciting business, established in 2007. And I was very interested to hear from you that last year you sold 500,000 snacks to over 300 clients across the UK, including to people like Transport of London, Lacoste, 3Mobile and Vitality. And good for you, you're currently attracting growth funding for a planned expansion across the UK. So Sara, representing Healthy Nibbles, welcome again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll ask you the same questions. Interested to hear, Sara, could you just give us a little context of your situation, your business, and tell us what has been the biggest communication challenge for you during this period?
Yes, certainly. So just to put in perspective, we've actually been established, just a slight correction, we've been established since 2015. But we work across nutritional well-being within the workplace. And we do that, we're a solutions-driven business, so everything from the actual service, so the product output in terms of healthy snacks delivered across snack boxes, unmanned retail and tech-enabled healthy vending. All the way through to sort of looking at the data and insights around that, the engagement within the workforce. I think the biggest impact was, well, for the business, we had an immediate impact in as much as we were within workplaces. So obviously when lockdown happened, there was that immediate transition to sort of working from home. I would say the biggest challenge that we faced was just probably not dissimilar to most businesses. It was the uncertainty and just not knowing how that was going to materialize. And I think obviously with a smaller business, you've left cash flow reserve. So it's how was this going to model into reality over the next sort of weeks, months, and beyond. So yeah, I think just the uncertainty was our biggest sort of challenge.
Yes, and that's a significant challenge. And what kind of key messages, given this uncertainty, were you sending to inside and outside of your business, Sara?
I think very similar to what we've heard earlier is that it was split down into two sort of key areas. I think I kind of broke it down when I was looking at sort of our topics of conversation and how we were communicating. I think the first thing was agility and innovation and really bringing that to the forefront. Despite the uncertainty, I think and the sort of fear of the unknown, there was this opportunity for innovation. There was an opportunity to be flexible, to explore different routes to sort of supporting our clients. And I think there's a lot to be said for developing this sort of muscle memory of agility that you can then go forward and use that sort of in future business challenges. I think it was being very connected to our clients and our customers to really understand what they were going through and how we can adapt our products and services to really suit where they were at in various stages of their evolution in terms of the response to this. The other aspect I think we looked at was really just the values and relevance element. So whereas there was the agility and the flexibility to be innovative and failure and shall we try this and shall we try that, but it was having that sort of line of continuity. And I think that is what has held us in a really sort of good, strong position. So we're all about enabling healthier choices. So yes, we're solutions driven and we have lots of different approaches to that, but it was about how do we help our clients enable healthier choices. And again, we've touched on this earlier during the webinar, was how are people responding to snacking within the workplace? Excuse me, especially when they were working from home. We found that snacking went up, and not necessarily in a good way. We're reaching for the fridge door far too often. So it was just around how do we support our clients and keeping that at the same time very sort of values led. And just remaining really true to our directive of being we're going through B Corp accreditation, and we're driving that sort of impact agenda, and it was making sure that remained a sort of continuity throughout all our communications, that we were still looking at how are we adding impact and how we're delivering impact to our clients. And I think the latter point, just on reflection, was around sort of patience and understanding, particularly more so directed within our teams. We have only a small team, so we're not dealing with the same levels of numbers that we've spoken about earlier, but it was just understanding what was required from me as a leader of the business, but also just different perspectives and different understanding how people were dealing with this challenge. Obviously, some people need that sort of certainty in a very uncertain world, and how to basically respond to that was sort of our key.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, Sara. What medium do you use for your communication, and how frequently are you communicating then to these two, inside, outside the business?
So inside is quite easy. As I say, we're only a small team, so we're on the phone. We've got usual sort of WhatsApp and Asana for task-based things, but more so just WhatsApp and really informal, and just jumping on the phone and actually just touching base and having those frequent catch-up calls. We did start very similar to, I think, what Kate said. We started quite frequently, where it was sort of a couple of times a week, and now it's less so, but it is still, we remain, it can be quite informal, just a sort of, how are you enjoying the sunshine, all of those sort of just nice to have touch bases, but also just trying to be as honest and as transparent as we can be as we go through this. I think with our clients, not dissimilar to a certain extent, we were quite frequent. There were very sort of practical issues in terms of us getting involved with the practical elements, like refilling vending machines and unmanned retail, and seeing what was going on in the workplace. But we use a variety, so social channels, email, and again, I did resort quite a lot to just picking up the phone and seeing how people were responding, and what the future held for them, and how we could actually support them during this time.
Absolutely. And are you measuring the results of your communication, Sara? And what are these results telling you?
I think the results are positive. We are seeing clients adapting their requirements. We're bringing on board new clients. So I do think certainly the communication that we're putting out there is having the desired effect. I think we've got to remember not to underestimate don't let weeks go by between communication, because so much is changing. And it's like the accelerator pedal is being pressed on business constantly and just not let up at the moment. So I do think everybody's environments are adapting and moving and evolving very quickly. So I think just sort of monitoring how people are responding, and also just being very much aware to our individual clients and individual customers, so you can kind of get a feeling very easily when you're certainly on the phone. Do they want to hear from you every week, or actually is it, don't speak to me for another month? And actually just being very sort of responsive to their guiding. Right.
Well, look, thank you so much, Sara. That's a really good, deep and rich meaning too. Thank you. We'll move on now to George, who's been monitoring your questions. So George, over to you. Thank you, Sara.
Well, thank you for sharing your very, very great insights. I start with a question to Lianne. You mentioned misinformation. Could you please explain what did you mean by misinformation? What sort of key issues were involved. And I guess this is also a question possibly to Kate and Sara. If you had to deal with misinformation, how did you communicate messages to combat that? And also, Lianne, last quick thing is you've mentioned a virtual town hall. If you could perhaps also explain what's involved there and how frequently you're doing those events and the reach of those events.
Sure. So the first question on misinformation. So the misinformation that I was referring to dealt directly with COVID-19 when it just began, right? How is it spread? How far it has hit in the UAE? What kind of symptoms should I be looking out for? So we got a lot of calls in with customers and employees who were panicking about what this truly was and what shape and form it was taking and what it meant for them. So for us, it was helping to, because information was evolving almost on an hourly, daily basis, it was important for us to look at what was available out there only from official sources, right? So we made sure that we stuck to whatever the WHO was putting out, and we had to keep using the same information to assure people that sometimes what they were hearing from friends or seeing on social media was not always true. The other piece was, particularly in the UAE, was how to access care. So the UAE government was very proactive in ensuring that all of their residents got the care that they needed when they needed. And it was important that we worked with the regulator and the government to ensure that there was no confusion about how you could access care, because again, that was an area of stress and anxiety. People, were starting to panic at the, slightest rise of temperature. Sometimes it would just be, a cold and a cough, and they wanted to get tests done. So it was helping them to understand what kind of protocols existed at the time when testing was not fully available, so they didn't have to panic. And then around the town halls for employees, I would say the virtual town halls were conducted using our WebEx tools. And we had our CEO on the town halls, as well as the senior leadership team available for questions. We conducted them once a week, every Thursday. It started off with a manager town hall first, where we got all the managers together on a WebEx, and we spoke to them about what was going on. We gave them information on how things were progressing, both with our customers as well as with our employees. And then we gave them the opportunity to ask questions that they would probably need to tackle with their teams. And after the manager town hall, we would go straight into an open employee town hall, where we would pretty much run through the same information and then open ourselves up to question. For us, there were times that there were questions that came up for which we did not have answers. And we were always very honest with our employees when we said, you know what, we're not sure what the answer to that question is at the moment. We're going to review that as a leadership team, and we'll come back to you. And one of the frequent questions that came up very early on was, how long is this going to take? How long will we have to work from home? And the answer to that was, we don't know, right? We're evaluating the situation continuously, and we're looking at different ways to try and help make this better, and we'll let you know. And we also had to deal with ad hoc requests, right? So there were people who did not always have separate rooms to work from home. So ad hoc requests would come up on the town hall, and we'd have to, and then we realized that there was a need for us to make equipment available for our employees as well. So I guess what I'm saying is the access to the leadership provided a significant amount of comfort and assurance, even if we did not always have the answers that they were looking for.
I just wondered if Sara or Kate, you had any challenges regarding misinformation in your line of work in your sector.
Yeah, so I'm not. Yeah, hi, thanks. I'm not aware that there was any misinformation, but I think similar to what Lianne said, I think a lot of effort went into answering almost predicted questions, if you like. So we had, as Lianne did, we had a dedicated microsite for the general public that explained Astellas's position in response to COVID-19 and the measures that were going to be taken, and going back to that care and reassurance that business would continue to operate and medicines would still be provided. And that was not a small feat, because if you think about it, air freight was significantly restricted, and where it was available was incredibly expensive. But conversely, our road transportation arguably was smoother and quicker because there was less transport. And so there were various challenges, but then we were able to find solutions to overcome that challenge. Internally, again, much as Lianne said, we have dedicated pages, and we do have also a dedicated task force, which is very much led from the top. So again, a real demonstration of leadership, getting involved, responding to questions, the ability again to ask Q&As, and similarly in terms of actual care for the employees, we did have access to apps that would support us with GP health and so on. So that also is in place. And in terms of our sort of trying to weather the storm for our patients and our customers, there were weekly calls from the logistics and distribution headquarters to each affiliate, so to each office, to ensure full understanding of the situation. So again, I think the approach that Astellas took was to try and to be risk averse and to try and identify problems before they arose. I'm not aware, George, of any misinformation, but I know that lots of steps were put in place to try and avoid that.
Hi, I think very similar to Kate, we didn't really have an amount of sort of misinformation, but we were incredibly proactive right from the outset with both our team and with our suppliers and the supply chain and customers. So it was fairly early on. In fact, we were working from home prior to it even being a requirement, but we were very sort of, I guess, very responsive and in touch and in tune, just to make sure that we could address any problems that could potentially come up. But we'd actually really mapped out our business processes in the event of multiple sort of scenario planning, depending on what that response was from a client or a supplier, or indeed the team.
Thank you, Sara. George, I'll bring you back in too.
Yes, I have a specific question here for Kate. You've mentioned wellness sessions. If you could please provide a bit more detail. But then I'd like to expand on this and ask all panelists about health and safety messages to staff. Now, Sara mentioned healthy choices and the issue of nibbling, but there's also more serious issues about fire and other types of hazards, mental health, and so forth. All sorts of things that you are normally geared towards dealing with in an office environment, where you provide certain safety measures, where you provide training and so forth. So I just wondered if all panelists could say a little bit, have you changed your health and safety messages to staff in terms of new guidelines, maybe training for remote work? What have you done to deal with those sort of issues?
Let's bring in Kate first. Thank you very much.
Yeah, George, there's been so many, but we had, I think perhaps being a pharmaceutical company, we are naturally in tune with health anyway. And so it was obviously above and beyond for Astellas to do it, but not unexpected due to the culture of the firm, is very much about the rounded individual and the looking after of their employees. But some examples, they actually brought in external experts. I think from recollection, one of them may even have been a yoga teacher. Now, it wasn't necessarily to say that we did a virtual yoga lesson, that wasn't what it was about, but it was more around how do you deal with uncertainty and various tips and tricks, if you like, for people, when some people perhaps that maybe even live on their own, may have found themselves with a lot more time, but people with perhaps pre-school children that require more effort to look after than older children. I have an older child, and she's largely looked after herself. You know, how do they manage that? How do people with a lot of time manage their days versus those that actually feel like they have significantly less? So it's more of a tips and tricks sharing. We also had the water cooler type forums that Lianne talked about. So this, some people were meeting up for virtual coffee mornings. My boss has been really great in making sure that we have 2 touch points every week, and they're touch points really that we can, it doesn't need to be about work even, it could be talking about some what we did at the weekend or what we didn't do at the weekend, how we're feeling emotionally and so on. So in some ways, and not just the looking and not just the use of cameras in people's own homes, but in some ways we are seeing our colleagues in ways we haven't seen them before. And I think somebody mentioned this earlier, although we're apart, in fact, in some respects, perhaps we've become closer as well because we've seen each other in our own environment. And we're also seeing each other at in different emotional states. Now I work in a digital team, and my days, as per my peers, were incredibly busy at the beginning, and I was incredibly productive, but I was also working quite long hours, and that's to be expected. But it's so interesting how in one firm you can get colleagues working different hours, colleagues under different pressures, whereas perhaps maybe our field force that are used to seeing customers face to face suddenly weren't having those interactions. And so the wellness sessions were really about trying to level that and give people tools that could be used for their situation.
I think that's a very good answer, Leanne.
Yeah, that's okay.
I think that's a great answer. So I'll just bring in, thank you very much. Thank you, Kate. Sorry, we'll bring in Lianne. Thank you.
Yes, so I would say, you know, we spent a little bit of time, again, trying to get our employees to access our remote capabilities a lot more. Our employee assistance programs with the counseling programs that were available 24/7. We also, you know, had available phone and online mindfulness-based and stress reduction programs. So it was ensuring that they were reminded that these exist, and you know, encouraging them to use it more. I think you know, our survey showed that employees were working longer hours, as Kate mentioned, because of the always-on culture. And as a result of that, especially for those that were living alone, there was a sense of you know, potentially increased isolation. So we were encouraging, you know, using the informal virtual sessions, but also the resource groups to encourage people to, you know, check in on each other regularly. And we also provided them with case manager assisted self-help programs, you know, where, you know, employees could call in if they had low moods or depression, or they were finding it difficult to cope. Or they needed, you know, just help and support with dealing with their finances. So I think it was pivoting a lot more towards, you know, our virtual care. capabilities, rather given that this is the new normal and people aren't able to physically meet each other and provide that support.
Thank you, Lianne. Yes, that's excellent. I'll just bring in Sara just to respond to, and then George, if I hand back to you to maybe one last question. So Sara, thank you. Over to you.
I think for us, what we found is that we found ourselves in the centre of a lot of the topics of conversation around wellness within C-19. I think it really shone, or it has shone a spotlight on well-being, on health, and specifically clear links between nutrition, obesity, diabetes, and recovery from COVID. So I think what we have found is within our business, we've found ourselves engaging at a lot sort of higher level than maybe we have done previously, and actually discussing with boards around nutrition, employee nutrition and employee wellness, and really the links between all of those metabolic diseases, but also mental health and the role that nutrition plays on mental health. I think in terms of for us as a business and sort of relating that back to our team, really it was about being mindful of how people work from home and what support we can do offer on an individual basis. So whether that was equipment, regular communications, sharing insights around handling uncertainty, and just really providing that sort of support framework.
Thank you, Sara. George, can I hand it over to you for perhaps one last question to one of the panels? Thank you very much.
Well, it's probably just wrapping up and thinking in terms of lessons learned. But what certainly is coming up is a question about face-to-face customer relations and those communications, and it's been mentioned before. I think it was by Sara, was it, that that you certainly, sorry, or maybe Kate, that certainly you have more discussions now virtually. So my question, which is also to do with lessons learned and the way forward, is what are the long-term effects on your communication strategy? Are you going to introduce new tools and forums, and will you reduce your face-to-face customer communications? How do you see the long-term impact of this?
So if I can just bring in Kate, and perhaps how do you see the long-term impact, Kate, and what's any surprises, lessons learned, just to close it off? Thank you very much.
Yeah, so just a quick thought is, I think for a long time we based our delivery on a customer preference, and it was often felt, I think even by the customer themselves, that a face-to-face contact point was of a higher quality than a virtual contact point. Now, what's interesting is if preference is taken away and rather replaced with need, i.e. there were no options here for face-to-face, when you force the hand, for everybody, when you are forced to think of an alternative solution, which for us has been a rapid rollout of digital, people then become accustomed to a new way of working. I think people have very short-term memories, and suddenly that then becomes the normal, but also they're forced to try something that perhaps they may have been apprehensive to try simply because it was different. And I'm relatively receptive to change, but I'm also a firm believer that probably not many of us actually really like it. We maybe like to think, we like to be thought of people that like it, but I think we quite like routine. So I think by forcing a new routine, by making it a need, I think it'd be very interesting. I don't think it will necessarily always be virtual. I think people are craving equally for some face-to-face interaction, but they've tried it now. For the vast majority, it's working. And not just that, I think a lot of people actually like this virtual. There's lots of good. And so we need to take the good from this and not revert back. We need to find a hybrid, a medium ground, is how I see it for pharma.
Thank you, Kate. Just finally from you, any surprises just through this experience? Lessons learned, biggest lessons learned?
Surprises for me, yeah. I mean, I think the biggest surprise for pharma is that there's an Edelman Trust Barometer, and the recent version of that has shown a marked increase in trust in the pharma industry as a direct result of COVID-19. Now, this is very unusual. You know, we can battle sometimes with our reputation, and you know, fairly unjustly, I think, often. But because the industry has come together in ways that we have not seen before with other outbreaks, such as Ebola and SARS, for example, we're seeing this total collaboration across the globe because COVID-19 has been so pervasive for everybody. It's actually, it's brought the industry together, and that's been incredibly well received. And so it's brilliant to see pharma being further up the scale in terms of its reputation. That is probably our greatest surprise as an industry.
Yes, well, that's fantastic. Thank you very much, Kate. Thank you very much. Sara will bring you in. Can you just give us perhaps your final thoughts, lessons learned, any surprises at Healthy Nibbles through this experience?
I think not necessarily a surprise, but a real appreciation that well-being and its sort of connection to managing pandemics and the importance it plays on employee health. It's great that we've seen that sort of profile raised and is a silver lining to obviously what is such a tragic environment. I think in terms of moving forward, I think obviously, I think as a smaller business, we're really agile anyway and very much driven by innovation and creativity. So I don't think there's going to be any fundamental changes. It's just accelerated our learning in that, in terms of what works, what doesn't, and just fostering that culture. And I think what it has led to is, as we continue to scale, that we'll do so in clusters to keep that sort of scale up agility and mentality going forward throughout the business as we continue to grow and scale, because I think that that's going to be important to continually coming up with creative solutions to whatever problems we face in the future.
Absolutely, Sara. Thank you very much, Sara. And we'll just bring in Lianne. Final thoughts, Lianne? Any surprises?
So, yeah, sure. So I would say in terms of lesson learned, I think it's really important to lean into your culture and values. Let that come through when you communicate, because being authentic is extremely important in these times, especially during a crisis. But there was also a need to transmit a sense of positivity whilst being empathetic. But one of the things we learned was how important it was to truly listen, ground up, right, and support compassionate and spontaneous actions, because there are requests that will come from lower level employees that you don't want to rest on your existing processes to deliver on. It's about being agile and spontaneous with the way you respond and the kind of help and support you give.
Thank you very much, Lianne. I know we can't see you, George, but can I ask you, have you got any final thoughts or comments, George?
Not really. It's been a really fascinating experience. I think we need to collate this. I found it very, very interesting today, as opposed to just talking about general business challenges last time, is to learn about the different communication tools, whether it's virtual town hall, the water cooler forums, some wellness sessions, and some of the other things that colleagues are doing and businesses are doing to deal with the situation. So I look forward to communicating this at a later point and collating some of these views. It's been a really fascinating experience. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, George. And it's my duty now to close off today's session. First of all, thank you to our expert panel. Thank you, each one of you. Lianne, Kate and Sara, it's been a pleasure having you at this webinar series. Thank you, George, to my co-host, to the Open University Business School. And thank you to you in the audience for listening intently and asking some questions. We have got 2 more webinars in our series. Finance is on the 1st of July, and Social Innovation and Leadership is on the 15th of July. These are live events, but they are recorded, so you can see a recorded version on the internet. So thank you very much again, everybody. Stay safe, and we look forward to welcoming you on our next webinar, Finance, on the 1st of July. Thank you.